First of all, sound check. Can everybody hear me in the back okay? And is there an uncomfortable echo or anything that's impeding people's ability to absorb? We're good? Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jody Blanco, and I'm 55 and almost a quarter years old. And from 5th grade through high school, I was the kid that nobody wanted to be caught dead hanging out with. I struggled to fit in for the same reason that maybe students in your schools and dioceses struggle too, simply for being different. My school years were a nightmare. I never imagined I would write about them. When I wrote Please Stop Laughing at Me, my memoir, long before the anti-bullying movement in this country, in fact, some would say that I was one of the founding pioneers of that movement, I never imagined that thousands of kids would start reaching out to me from around the country begging me for help. So I gave up my career in business and I started responding to these cries for help one at a time. That morphed into a program called INJA. It's not just joking around, where I go to schools and dioceses. I do age-appropriate student presentations, faculty and services, parent-family events, and curricula to keep the message of compassion, tolerance, and forgiveness alive. I've done that program for tens of thousands of students, teachers, and parents. Something odd happened along the way. I was at a school in California, and anyone who knows me or knows my work or has been at the convention before with me knows that I love nuns, okay? I am a nun groupie. If I had an opportunity between hanging out with the Rolling Stones or hanging out with nuns, I'm gonna take nuns. I love nuns. I have nothing but sweet experiences of them from childhood. Well, I was at this diocese and this cherubic nun, probably in her 80s, came up to me and she says, you know, your talks are really good. I really like your talks, but you're missing something. Well, when a nun says you're missing something and you were raised in Catholic school, you pay attention because you don't want to go you know where. And so she says to me, you know, yeah, bullying is a problem among students, but the bigger problem for me are parents who bully the school. Back in my day, you wouldn't have parents suing a nun because they would be afraid they would, you know, probably go to hell. But now they don't seem to be afraid of that. What can I do? So that is where this began. And it's so funny because in honor of her, I started doing seminars on parents who bully the school. Suddenly it became day-long boot camps where dioceses are bringing me in to do a whole day on the subject. Then it became a book for the NCEA, and it grew and grew and grew. So let me talk about what we're going to do today. By the time you leave this room, you will have concrete tools on how to deal with that unreasonable, irate, imperious, overbearing parent. And remember, what happens in W85 ABC stays in W185 ABC. What you will find is that you will understand this from a whole nother point of view. Now, bear in mind, when I go into a school and I speak to students, it's a whole nother ballgame because they're responsive in a way that adults can't seem to do, parent adults. So, what do we do when a parent walks into our office as an administrator, makes us feel this big, and seems to have the attitude, you work for me, I pay a tuition, you work for me, and I know what's best? How do you maintain your cool? How do you not give in to your very un-Catholic-y feelings? First of all, here's the most important thing that I can tell you. Imperiousness, obnoxiousness, rage, uncontrollable diminishing behaviors. All of those feelings when that parent is just nasty and mean and condescending and insulting and demanding and irrational, those are all secondary emotions. Fear is the primary emotion. So when that parent is freaking out, it's because they're terrified. You have their child during their waking hours more than the parent does, and they feel out of control. So when they come into your office treating you like dirt often, it's because they're trying to wrestle control because they feel so out of control. So the first thing you need to do is to remind yourself of this. And you need to remind yourself of this in as visceral a way as possible. Because here's the deal. If you can remember that that parent who's inspiring all of your most defensive impulses is really scared inside, it will help you connect to your compassion. And when you can connect to your compassion, it will give you the emotional and spiritual bandwidth to navigate through to an effective plan of action. So how do you do that? Here's your first homework assignment. I love saying that to teachers. Payback, yes! Here's your first homework assignment. This weekend, when you're home and you have a quiet moment, I want you to think of a moment in your own life when you were really terrified. A moment that specifically caused you terror because you felt out of control, because you knew there was nothing you could do, and you were terrified. I want you to connect to that moment. If you have children and it was a moment during which you were terrified for a child, use one of those. But any moment when deep down in your heart, you were scared to death. And then I want you to try and recall what year that moment happened. For example, if somebody said that to me, it would be an easy answer. It would be 1977, when I was 13 years old, and a bunch of kids at school cornered me in the parking lot and attacked me with snow till I almost passed out, telling me that I was God's worst mistake. And I was so terrified because I thought I was going to be sick, and that always scared me. So when I need to conjure that memory, I remember when that happened. That happened in February of 1977. So when you have this memory of when you were most afraid, find a song or a couple of songs that remind you of that specific time in your life. For me, it would have been Peter Frampton Comes Alive, any song from that album. A scent that reminds you of that age and that period of your life. For me, it would have been Love's Baby Soft Perfume or Bonnie Bell's Strawberry Lip Gloss. And a taste that reminds you. For me, it would have been, of course, that's an easy one. Everyone knows this, nacho cheese Doritos, okay? And you put them in a small trigger box, like a small shoebox. And if you know you're going to be encountering an irate parent or a parent that's going to put you on the defensive, take 5 minutes to yourself in a quiet place. Listen to the song on your iPod. Take a bite of the food, even if it's Wrigley Spearmint gum, whatever reminds you of that time in your life, and inhale the scent. And go back in your memory and connect to that moment when you were really scared. Breathe in and remember what that feeling felt like. Because then when you meet with that parent, you will feel the same fear they're feeling. They will sense that you can feel it, and it will diminish your defensiveness and allow you to connect to your compassion. Fear is the primary emotion. Why is that parent afraid? Bear in mind that many parents are executives. They're used to running companies. They're used to having people work for them. They're used to calling the shots. And suddenly, they're in a situation where they aren't in control. Now, there's a difference between authority and emotional credibility in communication. One of the biggest mistakes that administrators and educators make when dealing with an irate parent is that you believe when that parent calls and they're freaking out and screaming at the secretary in the front office that you want to give them a moment to cool down. You're going to give them a moment to cool off. That's a myth. Do you know what someone who is really angry and irate and terrified does when you give them a moment to cool off? They don't cool off. They fester. They fester. The best thing you can do when that irate parent calls is take the call. Even if you're in the middle of something else, take the call. Let them spew. They won't even make sense most of the time. Just let them spew. And then say, thank you for feeling comfortable enough with me to be that open and honest. Thank you for being comfortable enough with me to be that open and honest. When you thank them for their tirade, it will completely disarm them and you will own the moment. When you thank them for their tirade, it will completely disarm them and you will own the moment. Now, bear in mind, you will also have connected to your compassion by remembering a moment when you felt afraid and out of control. And when you feel in control, then you can navigate to solution. Now, if you're really busy and you really can't talk to this parent, after you thank them, say, this is a priority for me. This is a priority for me. I think it's important that we sit down together and discuss this in person. It's too important to just discuss over the phone. When can we meet? Bear in mind that parent is probably going to be demanding to meet with you that day, that second, that minute. But the minute you make them feel that they are a priority emotionally, that they are a priority, and you put it in their lap and say, when can we meet? Chances are that same parent who would have said, I need to see you right now, will say, can you meet with me next Monday? So you want to make sure that you take that call, you thank them for feeling comfortable enough with you to be open and honest. Then you tell them it's a priority, when can we meet? A lot of the problem with parents, one of the biggest complaints I get from parents is their child is being bullied. So they will call the school and then they'll call me because they know I'm going to be speaking at the school, and they'll say the principal isn't doing anything. The principal's not doing anything. And then I talk to the principal and I find out that the principal is doing a ton to address the issue, but because there's not a lot of communication, because the parent feels as if they're on the outside looking in, everything deteriorates from there. And bear in mind, one of the biggest issues that parents complain about that renders them the most unreasonable isn't necessarily academic challenges, though that can be tricky. It's bullying. It's their kid coming home in tears every day that makes them crazy. And I use that word in the clinical capacity. So you have to understand how to communicate with them in a way that makes them feel that you are in partnership together. So let me talk about communication. And by the way, this technique that I'm teaching also works on students, okay? And if you want to take notes, that's great. I love that. But if you want to just absorb and sit back and be entertained, everything that I'm giving you, all of the notes, everything is in an NCEA brief called Parents Who Bully, Challenging Parents, and you can get it at the NCEA. But so just so you know, you have that, and it's all on my website as well. Okay, there's a difference between authority and emotional credibility. There's a difference between authority and emotional credibility. Authority is when somebody is under you because you are granted authority over them by virtue of the state or your job. You have authority over the school if you're a principal. You have authority over the classroom if you're a teacher. You have authority over the diocese if you're the bishop or the superintendent of schools, okay? That's authority. Emotional credibility is when somebody trusts you. Now, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that because they have authority over a situation, that it automatically gives them emotional credibility with the people in the situation. And that is a costly mistake. If any of you are step parents, that's why step parents struggle. Because oftentimes they feel, you know, well, I have authority, so therefore I have credibility. Emotional credibility is different. It has to be earned. There are 3 tenets of emotional credibility in communication. And if you can learn how to incorporate these tenets when you communicate, you can transform any difficult situation with an impossible person into a mutually productive partnership. Tenet number 1, specificity. The more specific you are when you communicate with that irate parent, the more validated they will feel. The more general you are, the more dismissed they will feel. Let's take a kid example, okay? If you ask any kid, what expression do adults use that they hate more than anything? They will all tell you the same thing. They'll tell you, "We'll see." Because they know that "we'll see" is just dumb old grown-up speak for, I don't want to be bothered right now, leave me alone. And every time you use that expression with a child, they feel this big, even though that isn't your intention. Well, the grown-up version of "we'll see" is "I'll get back to you." And why is "I'll get back to you" a condescending thing to say? Why does it conjure negativity subliminally when you say that to a parent? Because "I'll get back to you" says, I'm the one in control. I'm going to get back to you. So that's why when you say to an irate parent, "Well, I'll get back to you," sometimes you don't get the response that you would like because there's no partnership there. You've got the control. What I tell kids, what I tell teachers on how to deal with kids, and I use a similar version of this for parents, and I'll give you the example because I'd like to give you French fries with your burger here. Let's say you have a kid, and the same applies with parents, and we'll get into that in a second. But let's say that you're dealing with a kid, whether it's your own child or a student, and they're bugging you about something, and you're getting annoyed. And so you feel yourself saying, "We'll see." And why? Because you want wiggle room. You don't want to have to promise something and then go back on your word, and geez, will you just leave me alone? But of course you can't say that. So you say, "We'll see." Instead, try this next time. Look at that child and remember, a parent who's terrified is a child inside, because when we're scared, isn't that what we all become deep down inside if we're truly honest with ourselves? So you say to that child, "I can't give you an answer this second. I need time to process my decision. Let's you and I get together here in this classroom or here in our kitchen tomorrow at this specific time, at which point I will give you my decision. But before we leave right now, I would like you to tell me specifically why this thing you're asking of me is so important. And then let the child vent. Don't interrupt. Then at the end, look the child in the eye and say, thank you for sharing that information with me. It will play an important role in my final decision. And then the next day, when you give that child your decision, if the answer is yes, explain specifically why. If the answer is no, explain specifically why. The real reward for that kid isn't yes, even if your answer was a yes. The real reward is that you listened. You made them feel validated instead of dismissed by being specific about your decision-making process. You allowed that child to contribute to that decision-making process by sharing specific information about why this thing was important to them. You also helped this child learn the thought process of prioritization. And here's the beauty part. You gave yourself the same wiggle room as we'll see, but you use specificity to validate rather than general, which makes someone feel dismissed. Now let's look at the parent. When that parent comes in, you want to be specific. So, specificity. So when you sit down with that parent, and I'm going to walk you through how to do a parent intervention, it's a doozy. You're going to love it. So when you do talk to that parent, you want to say to that parent, do you mind terribly if I have a notebook, as I'd really like to take notes? Like I said to you on the phone, what we're doing here is a priority for me. And I want to make sure that not only do I understand what you're saying, but that I have it down and I assimilate it. And then you ask them, now specifically, be as specific as possible. Tell me what the challenge is. Specificity. And when you respond, you're going to respond specifically. And I'll get into all these steps when we talk about our intervention. And I hop for steps, by the way. I'm going to ask you, I'll give you some advice and I'll say, is this tenet number 1, 2, or 3 of emotional credibility? And you guys will have to guess. And if you're struggling, I'll hop for the tenets as a clue. All right, so tenet number 1, specificity. The more specific you are when you communicate, the more validated the other person feels. The more general you are, the more dismissed they feel. Tenet number 2 of emotional credibility in communication, and we already touched upon this before, immediacy vocabulary. IV. When you're dealing with someone in crisis, whether it's a student in crisis, a colleague in crisis, or especially a parent in crisis mode, they need to hear words out of your mouth that connote immediacy. Right now, today, this minute, this morning, this afternoon. Why? It makes them feel as if they're an emotional priority. Now, I understand that if you're busy running a school and you have a ton of people at you all the time, you can't drop everything for everyone. But as I said before, unless there's a really legitimate reason that you can't do it, grab that phone call in the moment. And if all you do is listen for a second and say, this is a priority for me. In fact, so much so, we need to meet in person. When can you meet? It will take some of that edge away, because guaranteed, if you tell yourself, I'm going to wait to call that parent back until they cool off, I guarantee you they will fester, because it is human nature, right? Okay, the third tenet of emotional credibility in communication is my favorite as a professional writer. semantics and positioning. Semantics and positioning. And in a nutshell, all that means is present it the way you want it perceived. Let me give you a little sample of that. Let's say that you're a principal and you've got a student who's being bullied. So you're going to call the student's mom because you want a meeting. Now I'm going to act out scenario A and scenario B. And I want you to tell me at the end, which parent, which mom would you rather sit down with? The one from A or B? Are we ready? Now, come on, if you ask your students, are we ready? And they responded like that, would you feel psyched? So I want you to respond to me the way you want the kids to respond. Are we ready?
Yes.
Let's try that again. Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay, I believe we are. Okay, scenario A. Hi, Mrs. Gutierrez. This is Jody Blanco. I'm Amber's principal, of course. By the way, you have a remarkable daughter. We are so blessed to have her at the school. I don't know if Amber's mentioned anything to you or not, but she's been having a few challenges with some other students here, and she and I have come up with a wonderful plan of action that we can't wait to share with you. When can we meet? Now, this is scenario B. Hi, Mrs. Gutierrez. This is Jody Blanc. Of course, I'm Amber's principal. I don't know if Amber's mentioned anything to you, but she's been having a problem with some of the other kids bullying her at school. And frankly, I'm really concerned, and I'm wondering when you can come in to discuss the problem. Now, which mother are you going to want to sit down with? The one from A or B? Now, very good. Now, let's analyze why A is better. First of all, in scenario A, the first thing I did is compliment the student. When a parent gets a phone call from a school, the first thing that goes through their mind is, oh crap, what now? So when you compliment the student, it eliminates some of that natural defensiveness. If you can't think of anything complimentary to say about a student, lie. It's a venial sin. Someone here will forgive you, okay? Also, you'll note that in scenario A, I never use the word problem or solution. Let me explain why. Everyone talks about the importance of classroom management. When you're getting your degree in education, classroom management. You know what? I would venture to guess that none of us, because I've been a teacher too, that none of us learned classroom management in school while we were getting our degree. Do you know where we learned it? In the classroom. It's called baptism by electrocution. There's a far more important type of management that can mean the difference between a child losing hope or remaining hopeful. And that's called expectation management. Expectation management. You need to learn to manage the expectations of your students and by proxy, their parents. So in scenario A, I didn't use the word problem and solution, those terms, because it sets up unrealistic expectations. There are some problems for which there is no solution. If you have a parent who's dying of cancer, there is no solution for that problem. But every problem can be transformed into a challenge for which there is a plan of action. A plan of action doesn't promise an outcome, but what it says is we are going to seize this situation with determination and dignity to make it better. So there's none of that, you said you had a solution. No, I said we were going to take a plan of action. So in scenario A, I don't use the word problem, I use the word challenge. Also, let's really think about our own lives, everybody. If your significant other comes to you and says, we have a problem, it makes you go like this, right? But if somebody says to you, we have a challenge, it makes you go like this. You want to use language when you communicate with that irate parent that makes you go like this instead of like this. So therefore, instead of the word problem, we use the word challenge. Also, you notice in scenario A, I said, Amber and I have come up with a really exciting plan of action. So what does that do there? When a parent walks into a meeting with an administrator or a teacher, 9 times out of 10, they are feeling insecure. They don't feel they're up to the task of dealing with whatever the issue is. And what do most of us do when we're feeling insecure? We get defensive, right? So in scenario A, I told this parent, Amber and I have come up with a really exciting plan of action that we can't wait to share with you. So that mother walks into that meeting knowing, well, I don't have to fix anything. I just have to approve what they've come up with. So she doesn't go in there feeling intimidated, self-conscious, defensive, or uncomfortable, because there's already positive, proactive thinking that's going on ahead of her arrival. Let's look at scenario B. In scenario B, I never compliment the student. So that mother is thinking, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. Also, I use the word problem. So that mother is like, great, I have to solve a problem. What else do I have to do? And she's going to come in very nervous and uncomfortable. Also, in scenario B, I lead with negative. Everything about my conversation in scenario B was negative. Everything about my positioning in scenario A was positive. Does that make sense? Same phone call, same objective, same circumstances, different positioning, different semantics. Present it the way you want it perceived. Now, how do we do an intervention? And you're telling me when it's 2:30. Okay, that's your homework. Okay, thank you. So you're a wonderful volunteer. Thank you. So now how do we do an intervention with an irate parent? What are the intervention steps? Step number 1, and there's going to be a little bit of repeating here, the things I think are important. Step number 1, we find a quiet spot, we breathe in. When we're breathing in, we breathe in for 7 beats. And we breathe into trust, and we see that trust as white light, literally. And then we breathe out our fear. Breathe in trust, breathe out fear. And then we take, even if it's 30 seconds or a minute, it doesn't take long. We remember that time. It's called a sense memory, by the way, and you can thank Stanislavski for it, the famed acting teacher. We remember that moment when we were afraid, when we felt out of control, when we were scared. And we connect viscerally to that moment just long enough that it opens our compassion for that irate parent, as sunlight opens the scent of a flower. Does that make sense? Ooh, that was pretty good. Okay, step number 2. When you sit down with the parent, the first thing you do again is you say, thank you for being here. Thank you for making your child a priority. You would be surprised how many parents don't do that. Thank you also for feeling comfortable enough with me to open up the way you did when we spoke on the phone. That kind of honesty and courage is rare. Thank you. So what you've done right there is you've neutralized their defensiveness, and you've made them feel equal and worthy. Step number 2. I can't imagine how you feel. I can't imagine how you feel. I can't imagine what you must be going through. Please share with me specifically everything you need me to know. And by the way, would it be all right if I took notes? I hope that that's okay with you, because this, what we're doing right now, is a priority. And I want to make sure that I remember what's important? Do you mind if I take notes? No parent is going to tell you no. Then you let them speak. Now, when they open up, when they have this catharsis, you are not going to be necessarily happy because everything is going to be coming out at once like vomit. And there may be moments that it's going to put you on the defensive and you're going to want to go like, but no, but that's crazy. That's a load of crap. No. Breathe, remain calm. And every time you feel that defensive urge, which is human nature, not very Catholic-y, but human nature, when you feel that urge, I want you to connect to your sense memory. Connect to your sense memory. That will save your apples. That's what Sister Rose Agatha in the first grade taught me these words. You should always call them apples. So that will save your apples because you want to connect to your compassion. Everyone, there's a myth out there that intelligence is a derivative of intellectual ability. That is not true. Real intelligence is a derivative of compassion. Because if you don't have compassion, I don't care how smart you are dumber than a rock to me. Well, it's easy to have compassion for kids for the most part, except for the occasional sociopath. But it's easy to have compassion for kids. It's much harder to have compassion for their overbearing, obnoxious, condescending, think they know everything and don't know anything parents. Connect to your sense memory. Next step, after they vented, say, let's talk about a 3-point plan of action that you and I can engage in together as partners to address this challenge. Let's talk about a 3-point plan of action that you and I can engage together in to confront this challenge, to address this challenge. And then what you're going to do is you're going to whip out your laptop or your notes. You could just keep taking notes and say, okay, first of all, it's very important as partners, use that word a lot, because the more you make that parent feel as if they're a partner, the more agreeable they are going to be. Bear in mind, if you've got a parent who's complaining that their child is always being excluded, and then they feel excluded by you in the execution of a plan of action or a solution, do you see the psychology of that? So their kid feels excluded, and that's why they're coming to complain, and now you're going to make them feel excluded? I mean, talk about, well, talk about creating your own hornet's nest. Okay, so let's talk about a 3-point plan of action that you and I can engage together in partnership to address this challenge. Then you're going to take the problem statement, whatever it is. My child is being bullied. And you're going to transform it into a challenge statement with the parent. That's very easy. A problem statement is a negative. A challenge statement is the positive seizing that must happen to transform that situation. So if the problem statement is, or let's say the problem statement is, my child is flunking math. The challenge statement would be, we need to work together in partnership to help your child excel at math. So you come up with that challenge statement. Whatever the problem statement is, you're going to transform into a challenge statement. And then you're going to read it back to the parent. And you're going to say, now let's make sure that we agree together that this is the challenge we face as partners. Let's make sure that we agree together that this is the challenge we face as partners. One of the biggest hurdles in dealing with difficult parents is that the communication is bad between the parent and the school, because the parent is so angry, the school is so defensive, that they're fledgling in their communication, and you think you both agree on what the problem is, but you don't. But the communication is so bad that there's no clarity. Clarity and consensus can be life-saving. Clarity and consensus can be life-saving. So that's why when you take the problem statement and you transform it into a challenge statement with the parent, you are working in partnership. And then read it back. And the parent may say, well, that's not exactly it, and say to the parent, okay, this is good. This is what we need to be doing. This is excellent. Okay, how would you edit that challenge statement? How would you edit that? We have to be on the same page. This is your child we're talking about. We have to be on the same page. We're partners. And then you have the challenge statement. And then you say, okay, now let's come up with 3 action points that we are going to take to address this challenge. And then come up with 3 action points. Let's say it's the flunking math example. Action point number 1, and no action point should be more than a sentence or 2 at the most. Action point number 1 might be twice a week, Amber's math teacher is going to sit down with Amber and give her a 20-minute tutoring session in the teacher's lounge with snacks. Action item number 2 and action item number 3. And you come up with them with the parent. Same thing. You read it back to the parent. You make sure you agree on the verbiage. And then you say to the parent, okay, this is excellent. Now all we need to do, I'm going to type this up and I'm going to send you this in an email. And I want you to confirm receipt and that you agree with it, because we have to be on the same page. And then here's the biggie. Document, 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 document. You want to document, and you have to be in agreement on what the follow-up is going to be. That's another big complaint that I get from parents, is they're like, well, I met with the principal, they were going to do all this stuff, and I haven't heard anything back. So you have to agree on a follow-up. And by the way, you need to make the parent accountable for their elements of the action items, the 3 action plan of action points, and you've got to be responsible for your part. So you need to clarify who's doing what. So action point number 1, okay, you're going to take care of making sure the tutor sits down with Amber. But I'm going to make sure that Amber was comfortable and that she's following through on the extra homework. Great, we both have our marching orders. Action point number 2, what aspects of this are you going to do as the parent, and what am I responsible for as the educator? So it's clear. And then when you write that letter saying, you start the follow-up letter, and you need to get that follow-up letter back to that parent within 48 hours. You have to, you got to bite the bullet. You make your students get homework done with deadlines. Well, we can't have our students do things that we don't do. Kids hate that. Okay, so when you do that follow-up, and backtrack. So then after you've got all this, you've got it all written down, you review it verbally and say, terrific, I'm going to send you a follow-up email commemorating our meeting. Now let's you and I, as partners, agree on a follow-up protocol. What's our follow-up strategy going to be? What do we think is productive and fruitful? I would say that depending on the severity of the situation, what it is, my rule of thumb is, let's say that once every week or once every 10 days, you're going to give me an update on where you're at with your action items, and I'm going to give you an update on where I'm at with mine. And always have the same email. Don't do a new email all the time. Just keep adding to that same stream, okay? And then you might want to do an email update once a week and a phone call once every 3. You can determine what those parameters are, work it out in partnership with the parent. The other thing I recommend too is that when you do this meeting, that you're honest about how long it will take. So there's no unrealistic expectations. Remember, expectation management. Expectation management is anchored in what tenet of our emotional credibility, tenets of communication? What 2 tenets does expectation management hearken to? What are the 2 tenets? Good, brilliant, A+. Specificity, tenet number 1, and positioning and semantics, tenet number 3. So for your expectation management, you define what the parameters of follow-up are going to be. You repeat them as you end the meeting. You thank the parent again for working in partnership with you, for making their child a priority, for being so open and honest that you are so grateful for that. And then when you send that follow-up document, you incorporate all of this into that correspondence. And then for each email update, you add to the same stream. What I often do with parents, because you can imagine I deal with a lot of irate parents, what I often do is I'll go to the original email, and whatever I did that's part of that action point, I'll highlight it, I'll highlight that action point, I'll paste it into the newest email in the stream, and then I'll say this is an update on where I'm at with this particular aspect of that action point, and then I'll highlight it or italicize it. Now, why do we do this? The more documentation a parent gets, the more in control they feel. Also, parents are litigious nowadays, so it also gives you a documentational record in case anything gets snarky. Okay? And lastly, when you're dealing with these parents, you need to understand a couple of things about irate parents. Let me see a show of hands. How many of you have ever had a bullying situation? Let's say it's a victim of bullying. Let's say it's a girl. She's getting bullied by a group of kids, but she has her own social group. She's doing really well. She's thriving at school. She doesn't seem to be very upset by these girls who are bullying her. It's annoying, but she seems fine. And you have a mother coming in who's hysterical, who's hyperventilating, who's turning a mole into a mountain. A molehill into a mountain. Anybody ever have that? Where you have a situation where the kid is actually, the student's fine, and the mother's freaking out, or dad, to the point that it's making the kid freak out when before they were fine. Anything ever happened like that before? Or conversely, there are two types of popular kids in a school. The elite leader is a member of the cool crowd who's kind and inclusive. They are the secret weapon of your schools, by the way. I can teach you how to harness their power. The elite tormentor is the mean popular kid. Now be aware, everyone, of the elite tormentors in your schools. These are often the students who get good grades, who participate in extracurriculars, who volunteer for community service, who respect their elders, who raise their hands in class. And in fact, they are often the kids, when you're doing a school event for parents, you enlist them as the greeters at the door. And no one suspects that underneath their ebullient demeanors are kids who are sending other kids home every day in tears, not by virtue of the acts of cruelty they commit, as much as by the acceptance they deny. Well, have you ever had a situation where you have a group of elite tormentors and you try to talk to the parents of these elite tormentors, and these parents are completely in denial? No, not my child. Has that ever happened? You should all be raising your hands and shaking your apples. Okay. Here's why. $80 to 90% of the time, that overreactive parent is what I call an adult survivor of peer abuse. An adult survivor of peer abuse is an adult who is either bullied or invisibilized. And bear in mind, there are two types of bullied students in a school. You have the overtly bullied, who's bullied in all the obvious ways. Digitally bullied, cyber bullied, teased, made fun of, assaulted. But then you have the invisible student. The invisible student is the student who's not necessarily targeted per se. They're simply not on anyone's social radar. Well, invisible students often suffer far deeper and more long-term psychic damage than the overtly bullied. It screws them up more. Why? Well, if I slam you into a locker every day, if I call you stupid and a slut, after a while, you can say to yourself, there's something wrong with Jody. She's a bully. There's something wrong with her. But if all I ever do is look past you and through you instead of at you, don't acknowledge that you even exist. It doesn't make you say, there's something wrong with Jody. It may make you ask yourself, what's wrong with me? And that, everyone, is when bullying becomes long-term and insidious, because it motivates its recipient to question, there must be something wrong with me. There are many parents out there, and many of them are putting their kids in Catholic schools because they all think Catholic schools are perfect and that nothing ever goes wrong in a Catholic school. Those parents, whether they were the invisibilized when they were in school or overtly bullied, and the ones who were invisibilized are even worse. They're called adult survivor parents, adult survivor of peer abuse parents. There are two types of adult survivor parents. You have the adult survivor parent of a victim. These are the symptoms or the warning signs that you're dealing with one. They overreact to situations of bullying. Yes, their child may be targeted by a group of kids or one or two kids in particular, but they have friends. They're not completely alone or isolated. They seem to be doing okay, and yet the parent is completely overreacting. That's because that parent is reliving unresolved issues from their own school days and letting it spill into their child's present. Then you have the adult survivor of peer abuse, elite tormentor parent or bully parent. The adult survivor, elite tormentor or bully parent is the parent, they respond in one of two ways if confronted with a bullying situation. If they were bullied or invisibilized when they were in school and they're being told that their child is an elite tormentor, most of the time they will go into an aggressive campaign of denial. And that campaign will include trying to gaslight every other adult at the school. The reason they go into an aggressive campaign of denial and don't want to acknowledge that their child may be an elite tormentor is because they don't want to face that their child may be doing to other kids what their peers did to them when they were in school. It's too much to bear that I cried myself to sleep every night. All I wanted was to be invited to one cool party, and I never was. And now my daughter just invited somebody to a party just to set her up, to humiliate her. There's no way that my kid would ever do to someone what those kids did to me. That school is nuts. The other elite tormentor parent is the elite tormentor parent who really overreacts. If they're a parent, they're an adult survivor, they have a child who's an elite tormentor, and they have the opposite effect. Instead of going into denial, they become enraged at their child, and their response is disproportionate to the circumstance. Here's how you tell if a parent is an adult survivor. When you're doing your meeting, your intervention with that parent, and this is so clever, you say to the parent, by the way, I value this partnership, and I'd love for you to share with me a little bit about your school experience. Because I'm hoping that maybe there are some memories from your school experience that can help us navigate the best plan of action here. You've already been to school, you were a student, as was I, so I'd love to hear about your school experience. And did you have any experiences when you were in school that could help us understand what's happening here even more deeply? Anything you could share about your school experience could be really helpful to us right now. So you make it sound like you want to engage them for their wisdom and their experience. So you're playing on their ego and you're playing on their sense of feeling important, but at the same time, what you're really trying to do is find out what's going on here. And you're going to know right away. Because if you're dealing with an adult survivor parent, they love to talk about their past. I mean, I'm a survivor of school bullying. And I've written books about it. I stand on stages about it. I stand in gyms in front of 2,000 to 3,000 kids and spill my guts about my childhood years and how lonely my adolescence was. I have never met anyone who's a victim of bullying that doesn't want to talk about it if somebody asks. It's usually difficult to get them to be quiet. I know, because I am never quiet. So if that parent says, you'll know, oh my, when I was in school, I don't want that to happen to my kid. Here's what you do. You'll know right away. You guys are smart. You'll know. Then all you have to do is look at them and say, thank you for sharing that information. Your child is so blessed. Thank you for sharing that information. Your child is so blessed because this experience deepens your understanding of everything about school. And that's going to be so helpful for us. That being said, never use the word but. Anytime you want to use the word but, use the term that being said. That being said, we also need to make sure that we have a clear line between your past and your child's present. So you may want to consider chatting with somebody just for a couple of times, just to help you define that line. Because if you know this parent was an adult survivor, you're going to anticipate potential mistakes that you can make in dealing with them. Like, for example, you really want to work in partnership with them. You really want to be detail-oriented with them because they're not going to have an abandonment fear. They're going to have a fear of exclusion. So anytime that parent feels that you're excluding them, it's going to trigger defensiveness and anxiety. Well, if you know that ahead of time, isn't that helpful? Don't you wish you knew that about your significant others? I would love to know every time, right? So that, for those of you who have them, so that's a big deal. Now, also, here's another trick, okay? Here's another tip. Give someone something to do. In the world of adults and kids, we call it busy work. So if a parent comes in and you need to buy yourself time because you really are overwhelmed, let's say it's standardized testing, we love that so much, say to the parent, you know what the information that you share is going to be so valuable. Here's what I'd like, if this is bullying related, you and your child to do. Or let's say they're coming to you about a bullying teacher, a teacher who they claim is bullying students. Say, I'd like you to do a report for us. It will be so important. You can't imagine how important it will be. And do an incident report and explain to them how it works. The parent sits down with their child and they document the incident, the day and date it occurred, what happened, no more than a sentence or two per incident, what happened, how it made the child feel, and why. Should be in the child's own words if possible. And then you say, put together this report, and then let's sit down, and we are going to work in partnership to address it successfully. You have my word. You're not promising a solution. You're not setting them up with bad expectation management, but what you are promising, you're going to be able to deliver. You are going to come up with a plan of action in partnership with that parent. So remember, let's review very quickly before I go into the big finish and then answer questions. Number one, fear. Remember that irate, unreasonable parent is afraid and feeling out of control. Have a sense memory that you can use so that you can feel what they're feeling and connect with them on a deeper human level. Number two, when that phone call comes in, forget about that old adage, give this person a chance to cool off. They won't, they'll fester. Take the call. Let the parent vent. You don't even have to necessarily pay attention when they're venting. Just let them vent, okay? Then at the end, say, thank you for feeling comfortable enough with me to open up like that and be so honest. This is a priority for me. In fact, so much so that I think we need to do this in person. How soon can we meet? Put the ball in their court. 4, When you sit down with the parent, ask them if you can have a notebook and take notes. Again, reiterating what a priority it is. Tell the parent you want to work in partnership with them. Remind them how much you have in common. We both care so much about your child. Let's work in partnership. Let's work together. Partnership, partnership, partnership. Make sure after the meeting that before the parent leaves, that you have a follow-up strategy that you are both going to adhere to after you do your 3-point plan of action document that you follow up with later within 48 hours. Make sure included in that is, this is what we agree is going to be our follow-up plan, and then stick to it. And if for some reason you can't stick to it, everybody, here's the best tip I give everyone of all ages. When you're in a pickle and you're overwhelmed and you don't know what to do, it's simple. Lead with truth and compassion. Whatever the situation is, tell the truth, but deliver it from a point of view of compassion for the recipient to whom that truth is being told. Does that make sense? So call that parent, say, I know I was supposed to get you a follow-up email today, but I had a family emergency. Would it be all right if I got it to you on Monday? Lead with truth and compassion. Lastly, if the parent's really nervous and anxious and they're driving you nuts, give them something to do, an incident report, or say, you know what, the situation you're talking about is very similar to the situation in this film. I think you should watch this film with your child and see if it gives you any ideas that you can share with the school about how we can work together to address this challenge. Whatever you think a good busy assignment might be. If it contributes something, that's great, but even if it doesn't, it's contributing to your peace of mind because that parent is no longer feeling helpless. They are being made to feel helpful and thus validated. Also, another trick. Learn to say, I was wrong. Learn to say, I was wrong. One of the biggest complaints I get from parents is they'll sit down with an administrator or a teacher and they're really angry, and everybody knows that administrator or that teacher was wrong. They made a human mistake. We're human. Hello. They made a mistake. But that administrator or that teacher is so terrified of admitting that they were wrong. It makes them so uncomfortable that they can't say anything. Well, here's news for you, everybody. If you get defensive, you are going to accelerate the cycle of rage. You are going to accelerate the cycle of anxiety because you get defensive, but you're not listening, you're not listening. I told you, I did everything I could. That's a ridiculous, you're not listening. You're right. I was wrong. I could have handled that better. Now, how do we work together in partnership moving forward to create positive results? When you say you're right, I was wrong, that irate parent has nowhere to go, and you immediately diffuse that bomb. It also shows dignity, grace, integrity when you can admit you were wrong. Truth and compassion. You're right. I'm sorry. I could and should have handled that better. Thank you. So, right now, how are you and I going to work together in partnership to create positive results together? And then you immediately move on into the positive, proactive of what you're going to do together in partnership. Does that make sense? Okay. Lastly, for a lot of these families that you deal with, there's a lot going on that you may not know about. So before you decide that a kid is a bully, realize there's no such thing as a bully. What a bully really is is someone who's hurting, acting out in a cry for help. You need to work with the parents of the bullies and the victims to answer that cry. Because unless you answer the bully's cry for help, they will continue to bully until someone hears it or it's too late. Also, that parent who's terrified, that parent who's defensive, have your instincts out. Trust your instincts. If you think there's abuse in the home, don't be afraid to call DCFS. We are all mandated reporters. Don't be afraid to call Children and Family Services. If you suspect there's something wrong, if something doesn't feel right to you, act. Don't be afraid. It is our adult fear that leads to the loss of so many lives in our schools. And I will conclude with an anecdote about difficult parents. I was at a school. I was asked to give my INJA program at a district in the Pacific Northwest. And at 11 o'clock at night, before I'm supposed to do my middle school presentation at 8 in the morning, I get a phone call from an irate parent. She's hysterical. She said, my son just tried to hang himself in our barn. She said, he's a junior and he's been bullied all of his life. And he finally mustered the courage to ask the pretty girl to prom. And would you believe she said yes? And he was so excited. And someone at school put up a fake Facebook page that seemed so much like my son, you would never know it wasn't him, in which he admitted to being gay and that he only asked this girl out because he needed a beard. So the girl canceled the prom date. Her parents won't even let her see my son. And tonight, he tried to take his own life in the barn. I called the principal, or it was the night before. And she said, I called the principal all day. And he said he couldn't see me, that he'd have to wait until the end of the week because his whole staff was busy today preparing for the anti-bullying speaker who was coming to the district. Well, because this principal didn't understand our tenet number 2, immediacy vocabulary, because this principal didn't understand specificity, because this principal didn't understand positioning and semantics, because this principal didn't understand compassion, what did that mother do? She called USA Today. And USA Today was going to print a front page story on the life section about this unfeeling principal. So when USA Today showed up at the school, I did a little bit of creative intervention between the principal and the parents. And I told USA Today, interview this student. And the parents were like, no, no, no. I said, interview. They should interview your son. They interviewed the son. He told his story. It ran in the front page of USA Today. And later that week, not only did he get his prom date back, and not only did he go to prom, but they were the couple of the night. And he ended up starting an anti-bullying club at his school. And that principal, every once in a while will email me and say, a parent called, I took the call. I took the call. I was shaving and I took the call. So remember, every irate parent doesn't have to be an emergency. Just lead with truth and compassion and connect to your own. Quick announcements. If anyone is interested in bringing me to their school to speak or to do my program, all of the handouts are on your app. And all you have to do is click download handout and then it'll pop up. You can also go to my website, jodiblanco.com, JODEEBLANCO.com. There's a button on the main page that says Catholic Schools. Click it. It's got everything specific to Catholic schools. Also, if any of you are struggling and you just want someone to talk to, my cell phone number is all over that website. Give me a call. I'll never refuse a phone call. If any of you have any questions for me, I'll stay here for as long as you need so you can ask me questions privately. And they can't do a book signing after this because the convention center closes. But tomorrow I'll be at NCEA Central most of the day, and I've got a signing tomorrow, like in the morning, and I've got another one on Thursday, and I'll be at NCEA Central, so if you get a book, I'm happy to sign it. And thank you for listening to me and for being so kind to me. Thank you.